America is reaching the end of its economic and moral tether, and something is going to give, with or without the people's consent. So it is better to plan for, solicit, and establish the consent of the governed in anticipation of this inevitable change. To this end, I propose we must return the powers of the People's Congress to their Congress, and to the states the constitutional powers of the states. I understand a candidate proposing legislation prior to being elected is unusual, but then we live in unusual times. So I propose what I call the Liberty Act. With the recent passage of a $1.3 trillion omnibus spending bill that projects a growing $1 trillion anticipated deficit, on top of the $20 trillion we're already in debt, means the nation's debt to GDP ratio is over 100%, and the federal government, our government, is technically bankrupt. In a bankruptcy, there are only two choices: reorganization or liquidation. Liquidation means violent revolution, so reorganization is in order. Accordingly, I propose to legislate the decentralization of all federal, public, independent, and private agencies. By doing so, all the powers of our Constitution assigned to both our Congress and the states as prescribed by Article 1, Section 8 of our United States Constitution will have been restored. Over the past 100 years, the powers of Congress and the states have been handed over to various created federal agencies which are largely administrated within the executive branch via the necessary but not necessarily proper clause of the end of Section 8. The Liberty Act will effectively change that. And I will be addressing the history and meaning, the real meaning, behind the necessary but not necessarily proper clause in a future release. Now, the powers of all public agencies like the U.S. EPA, Department of Education, Health and Human Services, will be largely given over to the states, which already have in place agencies, mirror agencies, that allow for this smooth transition of power. Independent and private agencies, their law, regulation, and policy powers will be turned over to the lawmaking process of our Constitution as it is assigned to our Congress. I ask you, what is more efficient and closer to the people? 50 state capitals trying to get it right, or one ivory-towered bureaucrat sitting 1,500 miles away? Well, it may as well be 15,000 miles away, right? And I ask you further, why are 5 former lobbyists at the Federal Communications Commission given the power to decide internet policy for 300 million Americans when our Constitution assigns that duty to the elected 535 members of Congress? I intend to strike at the heart of what is wrong in America today, at the daily operating model of our government, the nuts and bolts, which, according to President George Washington, have been usurped into the hands of cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men. You know, the unhappy truth in America today is we are no longer ruled by the people, and there is no separation of powers in America anymore. Today, the powers of a Congress have been given over to federal agencies of the executive branch governed by even fifth-generation bureaucrats who have replaced the people's place, our Congress, in our government. And this, according to President Washington, is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. Sadly, this is the current fate of America today. This cancer of centralization is what drives the gap in wealth inequality, fosters low-paying jobs that has destroyed the middle class. It corrupts health care, creates deficit spending, overly funds elections, and extends itself even into endless war. Worse yet, someday soon, this centralization will extend into artificial intelligence, and AI will not serve, but will ultimately rule over we the people, simply because AI will imitate our centralized society. The ultimate guide of this agency reorganization leaves federal powers over national issues with the Congress and transfers non-national issues to the 50 states, conforming much to the way Andrew Jackson viewed the limits of federal power in respect to the constitutional powers of the 50 states back in 1828. My campaign for Congress is punctuated by the dual mottos, live the dream and take America back. As the highest service anyone can provide not only for their district, but for any congressperson to provide to any and all districts. This is the purpose of my national proposal of the Liberty Act to all Americans across all America. To view the Liberty Act, please visit electfawell.com on my blog page, as well as review my early endorsement of what I call liberty legislation, comprised of term limits, the REINS Act, and H.R. 24, the Federal Reserve Bank Transparency Act, which requires an audit of the Fed. If you would like to support my outreach campaign, please feel free to do so. Thank you for your kind attention. God bless you all, and God bless America.